Good morning. So as you may or may not know, my name is Nicole Gagner. I am a teaching artist, which means that I'm a full-time studio artist, but I also do some art teaching of the mediums that I enjoy. So I'm a painter primarily, but today I'm going to be talking about a really fun activity that pretty much anybody can do. I'm going to be using, these are called construction paper crayons. They look just like regular crayons, but they're specially formulated to have more pigment, which means that they will show up on dark colored paper like construction paper. I'm going to be using a black drawing paper. If you don't have construction paper crayons at home, don't worry, you can really do this activity with anything. If you have black paper, but you don't have construction paper crayons, but you have oil pastels, if you have nice colored pencils, anything like that might work. So try it out. If you have just regular white drawing paper or even computer paper, this activity can still work. On white paper, you could use anything. You could use crayons, colored pencils, markers, even if you had, just office pens and highlighters. Try it out. Who knows what will happen. We're going to be doing a kind of guided, controlled version of doodling. I think when a lot of people think of doodling, they think of just turning your brain off and scribbling. So we're going to do kind of a controlled version of that. So not completely turning our brain off, but you can definitely kind of zone out, get into really kind of drawing the same things over and over. Anything can be a pattern. You'll see by my example here that most of my patterns started with really simple shapes or lines. So I'll guide you through my process and kind of how I think about things. But you should definitely tap into what you find interesting to draw. If you can't think of patterns, look at the world around you. I don't know if your house has quite as much pattern as mine. I have a lot of pattern. But even our clothing has patterns. Usually, outside there's bricks, there's sidewalks, there's things to be inspired by like that. Or like I said, anything can be a pattern. So if you look on the wall and you have a painting of a heart, that could be inspiration for multiple hearts, could become a pattern. Or for example, you can see there are some bubbles on here. One bubble, not a pattern, but add lots and lots of bubbles, all of a sudden it becomes a pattern. So I'll walk you through some of that, but really the fun of this process is kind of getting into it, doing your own thing, and then kind of going back and seeing where you can add more interest. So for example, here, I started off with triangles up there, and then it was like, okay, well, the triangles are good, but what else could I do? And so I went back and I added little circles in there, or I could have even gone back and drawn little stripes inside of the triangles or stripes behind the triangles. So get creative with it, look around for inspiration, or take some of the inspiration from here and make it your own. And that's what is kind of fun about this. Like I said, I really like construction paper crayons because they show up nice and bright on dark paper, but they don't smudge. So if you are using oil pastels instead, just be careful of where your hand goes. A little tip for that is if you have just a scratch piece of paper and you put it under your hand while you're drawing, that way when you move your hand around, you won't accidentally smear it. This is one that I started on white paper with just colored pencils and markers. So again, you could really do this with anything. Okay, I'm going to switch to my top-down camera so that you can see my workspace that I'm working on. But the only things that you'll need for this are your drawing materials and your paper. Once you kind of see the process and how I'm drawing, how I do it, you might want to turn some music on of your own. Sometimes music can be really helpful to get us in that kind of drawing zone, or something like that will help you kind of really focus in. So feel free to do that if that helps you draw. Okay, so I'll switch this over here. And you might have a different brand of construction paper crayons. They all kind of work the same though, as long as they say construction paper crayons on them. You'll see when I pull these out, they look a little bit different than regular crayons, a little bit more almost pastel. They have a little bit more kind of white in them. But that's just to help them, kind of get some of those colors going. So I like to pick one color to start with. Here I'm starting with a gray, but white can be good, or blue, or anything like that. And then I will just start to make a line that goes all the way across my paper. This line is a little bit curved. Your line could be straight, curvy, anything like that. And now I want to draw a couple lines that intersect with it. So when lines crisscross over each other, we call that intersecting. And all of these lines so far are pretty curvy, and they're going all the way across my paper. I'm going to do a few more of those. What I'm really doing here is dividing the space up into big shapes, because you can see from my example here, if I just left this really big shapes like this, that would be a lot of space to fill in with these patterns. So I want to keep breaking these up into more small shapes here. Maybe some of these are really small, some of them are a little bit bigger. So some of these bigger ones, maybe I'll come back and do other things inside of. And now that I've got kind of quite a few lines crisscrossing here, maybe I want to do a couple big shapes, like a big circle here, maybe a big triangle over here. This little sliver there is kind of fun. That could be fun to fill in with pattern, but you could always, if you have some weird shapes here and you want to start barricading them off into smaller shapes, you can definitely do that too. What I want you to do is, after you've started drawing lines around your paper like this, look at all of your big shapes and go, do I want to fill this up with a whole shape, or do I want to maybe divide this off into smaller shapes? And you could even echo, if I have a triangle here, do I want another triangle showing up over here? Since I have a circle here, do I want maybe another circle showing up over here? In art, it's really nice to have a good variety of things that are different, and then things that repeat. So the things that are different, that's going to create contrast. The things that repeat are going to draw your eye around. So kind of look around there, see if you've divided this up enough for your liking. I think I could do a few more here. And this part is really abstract. It doesn't have to be anything. It doesn't have to look like anything. You don't even have to do recognizable shapes in here. You could just keep crisscrossing lines. What you don't want to do, though, is just scribble. You want to have nice big shapes here that you can fill up with patterns, just not too big that you'll get bored before you get to the end of them. So now I'm going to switch colors, and I'm just going to pick a spot randomly. What I don't like doing is I don't like going in order and just filling in one thing after the other. The reason I don't like doing that is because you tend to kind of clump things together a little bit. Like maybe I'm having a really small, precise drawing moment over here, and then I'm keeping really small, and then all of a sudden it gets bigger and bigger, and it kind of will look out of whack. But if I turn my paper around, try a couple different things, kind of skip around on my paper, then all of a sudden it doesn't look disjointed like that. It'll look a little bit more intentional. So that's something that you can think about doing. I am seeing one really big spot here where I just want to break these up. And actually, I was able to see that because I was looking up at the camera. If you want to take a break before you start drawing all of your little patterns and designs in here, another way that you can kind of take a break and get some space from it is just to step back a little bit, or lean back in your chair, hold your paper away from you. And that kind of distance will help you see things a little bit differently. And turning your paper around like I did, even when you're not working on something abstract, turning your paper around like that can really help you see things differently. Like if you are drawing a person and you turn them upside down, all of a sudden you might realize like, oh, I made, this thing completely darker and I didn't mean to do that. So let me go back and change that. All right, so now I'm going to start adding some patterns. And like I said, I'm just going to pick one spot and then jump to another spot, then jump to another spot. I like to start off really simple, just like I started my big abstract shapes here. Some of my first patterns that I always draw are just really simple stripes. So like I said, with my triangle example at the beginning, just because I start off with stripes here doesn't mean this is going to stay stripes forever. I could either come in right now and make these stripes a little bit more complex, or I could jump around and say, maybe I want to do wider stripes over here that are a contrast. You don't have to necessarily jump from thing to thing and then go back and forth and work on them. But I like to jump around my paper so that things kind of tie together. So I'll give you an example of okay, I have stripes here. Does that have to be done? Not necessarily. I could go back and within my stripes, I could add little dashed lines here. And now all of a sudden this is becoming a whole different pattern. It almost looks like little roads or something. Another thing you can do with stripes is make them overlap so that they become almost more like a plaid. Maybe I'll show you that up here. So this one started with some big stripes, and now if I have stripes going the other way, it starts to look a little bit more like a plaid. Maybe if I have a couple more stripes coming through the other way, it'll get really, really plaid-y here. But I'm not looking at anything from real life for this necessarily. You definitely could do that if you have, I happen to have a plaid shirt, so I could look to that for inspiration. Or, you could look at real polka dots or other textures around you, or you can just make them up, and that's fine too. Like I said, anything repeating can become a pattern. So I've drawn a couple big circles in here. That is a pattern. If I draw little circles over here, you can see how different that pattern looks, even though I didn't even change my color. All I changed was the size. So this is both that contrast that I was talking about, in that they are different sizes, but it's also that repetition that I was talking about, in that you're seeing a circle here, you're seeing a circle there, and now all of a sudden it draws your eye around to those things that match. But neither of these patterns have to be done. This one, maybe with my circles, maybe I want to have some dashed lines going with it. And you can see that starts to add interest to this pattern. So I'm just going to keep drawing patterns here. You are welcome to make up your own patterns. You are welcome to copy some of mine. It's in art, it's never really copying. Copying sounds like such a bad, like, oh my gosh, I'm copying her, I feel so bad. Never feel bad for learning from other artists. You're taking their art and being inspired by it, because you're going to make it your own, even if you aren't really thinking about it. It's going to become your own piece of art once you've done your interpretation of it. You have your own style. I mean, really, the more that you make it your own, the better, of course, but there's no shame at all in learning from other artists. That's how everybody learns. In fact, all the way back to like the Renaissance, something like that. That was how anybody would learn how to do a craft, and art is absolutely a craft. So a master painter doesn't start a master painter. They have to apprentice under somebody, learn under somebody that knows more than them, and they will start out in their style. And then the more experience they get, the more they will make it their own. On top of all of those things that they've learned, they'll keep adding to that. So that's my little spiel about, nobody starts out knowing everything. You've got to learn somewhere. Also, really quickly, so I really wanted to show you how fun construction paper crayons are. But if you've got other materials too that you want to add in, like I said, with black paper like this, some colored pencils can work really well on here. I've got some oil pastels. Like I said, I'll be careful not to smudge them if I pull those oil pastels out. But, work with what you have, but you can absolutely get really creative with your supplies. In art, we call that mixed media. So these are all drawing materials. But if I'm using multiple different drawing materials together, I'm making a mixed media piece. And some of these really, really basic ones are just kind of my autopilot when I'm not thinking about what I'm drawing. If you are having trouble, if you don't have autopilot doodles, that's okay. Just start trying one thing out and then trying another thing, and eventually you will kind of reach a groove. And even if all you start out with are stripes, no shame in that game. Straight stripes, overlapping, straight stripes, close together and far apart. All of a sudden, those become really interesting. I did a couple curvy stripes up here. So what would happen if I, do a different type of wiggly curvy stripe? Looks completely different. So have fun with that. Can be really, really relaxing. I did bubbles here without talking about how I did them. So I'll do them over here again, maybe, and just talk about, because bubbles, bricks, there's a couple other ones like that that are kind of ubiquitous patterns that, oh, that green might be too close. Maybe I'll do bubbles over here. There are these patterns that look really cool once you put them all together, but they're simpler than they seem. So all I do for me to draw a bubble is I start with a big circle, then I have another circle that touches it, but it's not a completely full circle. So you can see that's like a semicircle there because it's touching these other circles. And then within the circle, I draw a couple letter C's next to each other, or, a curved line that's like a letter C. And then I connect those together. And then if I can fit it, I draw a little line in between. So that just kind of looks like a little cartoony version of a highlight. If you look at a real bubble closely, they're a lot more complicated than that. Usually they're reflecting colors in, if they're made out of soap reflects a lot of rainbowy colors, things like that in it. But these are a nice, fun, simple version of a bubble. And this is just how I draw a bubble. I love to draw them piled up together like this. But maybe your bubbles are spread out in the water, and so you don't want them piled up like that. And that could work too. Really no right or wrong here. Please, by all means, experiment with all of these things, make them your own. Same way with, I think a lot of people, the very first time they draw bricks, they think they need to draw, well, here, I'll show you what I mean. They think that they need to draw every single rectangle here, which works. This is a fun way to draw bricks, especially if you want like kind of more like stonework style, like, oh, they're all a little bit uneven, they're hand cut. And still, if I draw a stone wall or something, that's usually more how I do. I draw each individual stone. But if I'm really, the thing that I want to do is I want to make it look like repeating bricks. Usually what I'll do is I'll start with straight lines that are pretty equal apart, but you could, mix them up too, have some closer together, some further apart. And then in those lines, I will stop it with the edge of the brick, but I don't have them line up. I have them alternating. And that all of a sudden really starts to look like brickwork. And this is a really good example of one that could be done. A brick pattern on its own could be really fun. Or you could say, well, maybe each of those bricks, there's a couple different styles of bricks in there. So I have some orange striped bricks in here. Maybe I'll have some, pink dotted bricks or something like that. Lots of different ways. You could even just color them in solid. That's something I haven't really talked about yet, but that's totally an option if you draw in some interesting patterns and then you're like, oh, I think those circles would look better filled in. Great, go for it. Fill it in. Nothing wrong with that. I tend to just like drawing patterns more. And then some of my patterns I will make really dense. So when I say a dense pattern, I mean something that's lots of things close together. Like these stripes here are very dense that I'm drawing. But I like to alternate that with a more open pattern. So to me, that's a little bit more interesting than just coloring a whole thing in. But if it works for your pattern and that's your choice, that you think it would look best to really completely fill something in, by all means do that. See these little overlapping stripes that I've drawn here, they're almost like a really dense checkerboard. So if I drew those bigger over here, maybe that's an example of, would this checkerboard look better with every other one colored in? If you're really going for a checkerboard look, that's how you do it, right? Or, again, you could fill every other one in with a different pattern, or you could have it random. You don't necessarily, I know when you take math at a certain grade, they teach you patterns in math are like, they have to be repeating, like AB, AB, or AABB, AABB. And that can absolutely be true of patterns in art. Like I think this one goes like A, B, A, B, right? But in art, you have a little bit more freedom, of course, than math, because, you know, in math, there's usually one right solution. In art, there's lots of interesting outcomes that you get to decide. So that comparison that I'm making here, there's like no real right or wrong. If you're making patterns and they're interesting to you, then it's the right solution, right? But you can definitely be inspired by some of those things. I hope that makes sense. To me, there's a lot of art connections to the world. So I hope that's not too out there to say that. Since we're talking about math, maybe I'll do some X's and O's here. When you get up into higher math, the really crazy math, there's more letters than numbers half of the time, it seems. But you know, X's and O's can also be Valentine's, hugs and kisses, things like that. So not just mathy stuff, fun stuff too. I guess math could be fun too. Somebody definitely thinks math is fun, right? You can see I'm kind of jumping all around here. But some of my colors, you know, I'll use something similar right next to each other, as long as there's still some kind of contrast there. Like I wouldn't draw these kind of fish scale shapes here, which these fish scales, it's just a letter U and another letter U, but it's connecting with the other letter U's and alternating. So that's how I get that fish scale look. I wouldn't keep drawing fish scales over here, or I wouldn't draw them the same size or the same color at least. But like there's green right next to green here, but they feel really different. So you can kind of think about all of those contrasts as you're kind of jumping through. Pull out some different colors over here. Just a light pink like this yet. I haven't talked about this yet, but a lot of my shapes are really geometric, like triangles, you know, straight lines. That's a really geometric way of drawing. The opposite of that, or something that's a nice contrast to that, you know, we've been talking about contrast so much, are these organic shapes. So like these curvy lines here, anything swirly, those are an organic shape. So if that's something that you have or haven't noticed yet in your drawing, you might want to try changing that up a little bit. If you tend to mostly draw really organic, curvy shapes, how could you change that up to, you know, be inspired by something geometric, or vice versa? If you tend to draw a lot of really geometric shapes, can you pull something out that's a little bit more organic and more curvy? Not saying you have to. If you're just getting in the zone of your style of drawing, please, by all means, continue with that. But if you're looking for a little bit of inspiration, sometimes it's good to look at what your automatic default is and do something a little bit different. And I would say all of these shapes are staying in the fairly abstract zone for me. I haven't done too many things recognizable. Not that it's bad. I guess that was kind of a sun shape. It's definitely not bad for it to be recognizable. It can just, sometimes it makes it more fun to have it recognizable. Sometimes it almost takes the fun away. So decide if you want things to be recognizable, or if you'd rather just kind of zone out and not worry about, will people know that I drew a flower? Will people know that I drew leaves? You know, turning things into a pattern, though, sometimes takes away a little bit of that pressure. For example, if I just draw football shapes like this, I can leave them as football shapes if I want. or I can come back and add the things into them that would make them, in my mind, leaves, like those little stripes on the inside. But you don't have to, you get to, this is your art. You get to do it in your style. I haven't done triangles yet. Triangles are one of my favorites. Funny that I haven't done those yet. I think I talked about them at the beginning, so I felt like I had done them. There we go, just some simple triangles in there. And then triangles to me always look lonely without dots. So there we go. All right, well, I'm getting close to done here. You should definitely, if you, or when you get to the point here where you have most of your paper covered, you should take a step back. Like, remember I said, hold it away from you, or even prop it up and step back from it. And that kind of helps you get a little bit of perspective. If you think about when you go to a gallery or when you go to a museum, you don't look at things as close as we tend to sit when we're drawing or painting. So if you can get a little bit of space from it, I mean, best case scenario, hang it up on a wall and step back from it. But even just, stepping away from your table and kind of looking at it from further away can really kind of change that perspective a little bit. And it can be great practice to look at your neighbor's artwork also. You don't want to make them uncomfortable. You don't want to stare over their shoulder and critique them necessarily. But looking at what other people's inspiration is can be really inspiring to you as long as they're comfortable with it. You can even, once everybody's done, kind of step back and see like, oh, I noticed that so-and-so did lines in a completely different way. I'd never even thought about that before. Maybe I'll try lines like that in the future. You can even think of it kind of as an homage to them. Again, it's not copying. You're just taking inspiration and learning from other people. And there's nothing wrong with that. So if you are happy with this piece of work, make sure that you sign your name on it. There's nothing more of a bummer than when somebody really likes a piece of art and they don't know who did it, who to give credit to. But don't forget, you can, turn it, try out different corners, things like that. Look at it from different angles, especially since we're doing something that's so abstract. There's no one right or wrong direction here. Really spin it around, see how it looks from different perspectives. And in that spinning, maybe you'll notice, like I noticed I have a whole bunch over here that I haven't even touched, probably because it was kind of far away from me. So maybe you'll start noticing the same thing. So go ahead, play around with that. You could also look back and say like, oh, maybe I should go back and fill this in, or maybe this needs, like I could do little dots on top of this even. That's something that's really fun about working with the construction paper crayons, oil pastels, things like that. You can actually draw right over the top of what you've already drawn. There will be a point where your paper will get too saturated with the waxy material. If that point comes and you want to keep drawing on top of it, you can actually take like a card or the edge of something hard and scrape the wax off so that you could draw on it a little bit more. But there's a point where that only works so much. It can be nice though for if you're doing lots of, if you've ever tried blending with crayons, there gets a point where your paper gets a little bit too saturated to really blend. So you can try, scraping that down a little bit, and then you can draw over the top of it a little bit more. So that's another fun little thing that you can do with these. That only works with waxy material, so that wouldn't necessarily be a tip for like a colored pencil or anything like that. Those have other ways of blending. Not that this drawing needs any blending, but just another little fun drawing tip for you. All right, well, I'm going to call that done for now. Hopefully you've got lots of inspiration here. But again, if you are feeling short on doodle inspiration, please, by all means, look at the world around you. There's always something interesting to be inspired by. For example, I just saw one last thing, little vines here. So little curly lines with little vines coming off of them. But all right, well, thank you guys so much for drawing with me. I will switch back to my other camera here to say thanks for drawing with me. If you're having a snowy day like I am, I hope you're staying warm and dry. But yeah, keep looking to the world around you for inspiration and keep having fun making up patterns and doing your own thing. Have a good one.